Hey guys, and welcome to another video, finally. So today I'm going to talk about 10 albums that I discovered in 2020, but that haven't come out in 2020. And before this video starts, I just want to plug a few things. So firstly, subscribe, um, yeah, and like this video. And also, if you want to keep up with what I'm feeling at the time and what I'm listening to, then you can follow me on Twitter at Imprecise Words. You can follow me on Instagram for album recommendations on my stories every night. And you can follow my Rate Your Music at Donny Bar with 3 H's. And yeah, now onto the video.
Also, I forgot to say this in the video, but shout out to Not Real Music for this idea. I practically ripped it off him, so shout out to you.
So a lot of shit has happened in the past year. So I've had a lot more time to stay at home and listen to music and digest more music. Through lockdown and quarantine, I listened to hundreds of albums. I know, pretty depressing. And these I've gathered as my top 10 that I've listened to this year, so not counting last year, obviously. So at number 10, I've got Scott Walker's Scott 3. While a lot of people look at Scott 4 to be his best during this era of Scott Walker, I think Scott 3 is where he really nailed this type of Baroque pop. Some of the songs in here are so theatrical that when I played them in Funeral Tango in the car, my brother thought that it was from a musical, like an old-timey one. But regardless, some of the compositions on here are absolutely brilliant, particularly on We Came Through, when the music starts to pick up and it's like a horse galloping on a racetrack with the rush that it gives you. And the change in feeling on that track is particularly immediate because of the way the instrumental becomes faster paced. Also, his voice is just as smooth as butter on every song. I think his vocals are definitely at the peak on It's Raining Today and Funeral Tango, where he accommodates perfectly for the instrumental. Number 9, we have Ever Since by Blade. Yes, I put this on here. What are you going to do about it? You know, when I first listened to Blade, I didn't think I would listen to him again, but I was definitely wrong. The way Blade perfectly incorporates his voice to almost become one with the instrumentals is a feat that I've yet to hear from anyone else in hip hop. While some may write his vocals off as being lazy, I think that the way he uses it is almost masterful on this album. The way his vocals practically sinks into the instrumentals on tracks like X'd Out and Sugar is something to behold. And even on the more hip hop inspired songs like Who Goes There, So What and Missing Person, his voice is worked so perfectly over the instrumentals, and that credit should go to both Blade and the producer White Armor. The production is extremely spacey and cloudy, which matches perfectly with Blade's melancholic vocals and lonesome lyricism. This album is just brilliant to me, and even though it may take a while for some to click, when it does, it's absolutely euphoric. Number 8, we have Tim Hecker, Harmony in Ultraviolet. This is probably the most perfect album to walk to. Like, if you want to go for a walk and feel like you've done something life-changing, then this is the album to listen to. From front to back, this album is beautifully textured and layered to a point where some tracks, like Dungeoneering, almost become cloudy in a euphoric way. The shifting tones and drone layers make this album absolutely magnificent in that it's able to create this dark and depressive atmosphere around itself. And my god, are some of these tracks absolutely stunning. I've already mentioned this track, but Dungeoneering is genuinely a beautiful cacophony of sound. Harmony in Blue too is also beautiful, but in a way that the underlying tones and synths make this such an aesthetically pleasing listen. In fact, all the variants of Harmony in Blue are incredible, so yeah. Highly recommend checking this album out. It's absolutely one of my favourite drone albums of all time, and Tim Hecker, you can't really go wrong with him. Next up for number 7, we have John Coltrane's The Olatunji Concert. This is probably the musical equivalent to Hell. I've heard plenty of albums that can sound passionate, but none of them quite like this. To give a quick background to the album, this was the final live recording John Coltrane would do before he lost his fight to liver cancer in 1967. And this live recording may be the best live album I've ever heard. Coltrane's screeching and soaring saxophone playing is something to marvel at. Not only can you hear the passion, but you can hear the pain in it. The first track, Agunde, is such a psychotic hellscape that there's absolutely no way that it can get crazier than this, right? Wrong. The rendition of My Favorite Things is my favorite of all time. It's basically a chaotic symphony with screeching saxophones, and when the melody creeps in on you, it's pure euphoria. This is an absolute belter of a live album, and I implore you, if you're a John Coltrane fan, to listen to this because it is the perfect swan song for one of the greatest musicians of all time. Next up, we have Shibasa Shiratsu Shibaboshi. Organized Chaos is one of my favorite musical things because within the chaos there's beauty, and that's what I love about this album. The chemistry displayed by the band on this album is literal perfection. The way they can transition from bombastic display of horns and drums into becoming a whole with rich and celebratory symphonies, you just can't help but nod your head to it. Every single member of this band has to be on the exact same page and in sync every step of the way when making something like this, as something as grandiose as this, and they are perfectly in line with each other, and that's almost scary. Tracks like Images and The Dam will always have a special place in my heart because they changed the way that I looked at how jazz music can be played. When I first listened to it, I was still pretty new to the genre, and they both blew me away, and they still blow me away right now. The amount of phases and transitions within the one song and the way these transitions smoothly go through the motions is just insane. I heavily recommend checking this out if you're a fan of jazz and want to get into more free jazz and love triumphant type stuff. Shushu plays the music of Twin Peaks. This is some dark shit, bro. This is basically a rework of the original Twin Peaks soundtrack, but made to be more freakier and darker than it already is, and they succeeded. While the original was stuck to its more dreamier and jazz form, Shushu incorporated more industrial elements to make the songs all the more scarier. The reimagining of Laura Palmer's theme includes a much louder and harsher instrumental, seeming to hit every note harder than the original. And rather than the dreamy original version of Into the Night, this version is much louder and epic. Also, Jamie's vocals completely contrast Julie Cruz's, with it being more shaky and disturbed. And don't even get me started on the brilliance of Falling, because my god is it perfect. It's again harsher and louder than the original. Jamie's vocals are again disturbed, and his inflections are perfect for this instrumental. But can we talk about Blue Frank / Pink Room for a second, because it is such an incredible song. The loud and distorted guitar work is genuinely noise rock perfection. Even though this track is just pure instrumentation, it's genuinely the absolute highlight of this album. But when Josie's Past hits, I don't think I've been more disturbed by a spoken word track ever. Like, not even Diamanda Gallus can disturb me as much. It's the most disturbing shit I've ever heard. But nevertheless, I heavily recommend checking this out because it's basically a better version of the Twin Peaks soundtrack. Next up, we have Natural Snow Building's Daughter of Darkness. Yeah, this is a long album. This album is drone and free folk perfected. It's 7 hours of the freakiest and darkest and ritualistic drone music that you'll ever hear. Natural Snow Buildings are probably my favourite drone artists ever, next to Tim Hecker. And while I do love albums like Dance of the Moon and the Sun and Shadow Kingdom, I feel like Daughter of Darkness is where they hit their peak and the peak of drone music in general. The use of psychedelic instrumentation just adds to the ritualistic nature of this album, almost sounding like it could be played in a cult, if that makes sense. It's such a weird experience, you know, it's hard to describe what you feel during this album. Like, every song is as hypnotic and spiritual as the last, and it just feels like you're walking down a very dark and cold path. While I haven't listened to this all in one go, I've only listened to it in sections because it's separated by 4 tracks. I really want to listen to it in one go one day when I have the time. But for the first listen, I do recommend checking it out in separate parts. Heavily recommend checking out Natural Snow Buildings, like, in general, because they are one of the greatest bands I've ever heard, and I really need to check out some more of their stuff. But yeah, check out Daughter of Darkness because it is one of the best albums I've ever heard. Next up, we have Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, Aus den Sabien Tagen. I listened to this recently and absolutely blew me away. It is, again, a 7-hour long album, but it's really worth the time. It was an insane experience for me, and probably for anyone else who's listened to it front to back. This is where I think the act of improvisation was perfected. Every note, every clatter, every bang hit absolutely perfectly. And I find it hard to describe the experience of this work because of the style of music that it is. I mean, you can see in my tweet that I absolutely loved it, but I couldn't find the words to describe it, and I still can't right now. So yeah, I may not be selling it too well, but I highly recommend listening to it. It goes for around 6-7 hours, so listen to it in sections, but listen to it. All right. Next up, we have Masakatsu Takagi's Kagayaki. I don't think I've heard an album that feels as natural and warm as this one does. Masakatsu Takagi is a pretty obscure artist who has recently gained popularity through Rachel Music, with the album shooting up the charts, with now over 1,000 ratings, which is awesome. This whole album is just magnificent and stunning and beautiful, with the piano use being the absolute highlight for me. Songs like Uharu and its piano version exemplify this, with the beautiful piano playing backed by a group of people singing. It just feels like such a natural experience and like a familial experience that's really hard to capture in a piece of art. What I also love about this album is its way of interweaving soft and somber moments and transitioning into more celebratory and bombastic moments, like the transition from Shiraiki, where it's mostly an old woman singing with a soft piano melody playing behind, to the piano version of Uharu, where it's a bombastic and beautifully crafted piano piece that feels like a celebration. And also, by the way, if I'm pronouncing any of the tracks wrong, it's because I don't speak that language. So just excuse me for that. I'm going to try my best. Also, the track Usagaki Part 2 is genuinely one of the most beautiful, happy, and celebratory songs I've ever heard. The mix of the loud and bombastic piano with the medieval type instruments over the top is just like a match made in heaven. The album just gives off the feeling of pure bliss and happiness, and I heavily recommend checking it out if you want to feel that. And last but most certainly not least is Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker. I mean, what is there to say about this album that hasn't been said already? The concept is absolutely incredible, and while none of my family have experienced this trauma, I feel like I had through this masterful piece of work. Its 6.5 hour runtime is completely justified in my opinion. This album was created and released over the course of 4 years, stage by stage, but I'll be talking about the final product, obviously, the whole thing. Stages 1 through 3 are the usual turntable music where the individual may be remembering a ballroom dance that they once had when they were younger. It's all upbeat and happy, and you can feel the joy jumping out of the turntable when you're listening to it. Until stage 4, where it becomes like more dark ambience with tiny little glimpses of memory of this time. Stage 5 becomes even darker, with even less memories being had of this joyful time in their life. And stage 6 really kicks you in the gut, as it's now pure, unadulterated dark ambience and drone. Nothing peeps through the cracks. No fun memories to be had. Just darkness. And the ambience creates such a foggy atmosphere around the music to stimulate this memory loss. Until the last 5 minutes, where the individual catches a final glimpse of this time in their life, where they were free and happy, and it really, really kicks you in the stomach. And when that moment comes up, even when I know it will, it always makes me tear up, because I feel like I can relate to this experience now, even though I can't. This is an absolutely gut-wrenching musical experience that I've never felt before or even after listening to it. So I heavily, heavily, heavily implore you to listen to this album, or give it a chance. I recently, a couple months ago, listened to it all in one go. Yes, I'm a loser, and yes, I did it, and it was an insane experience for me. But yeah, this is absolutely one of the best albums I've ever heard in general. Again, heavily recommend you listening to this album because it's an absolute masterpiece. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be back hopefully next week for my top 50 of 2020. So look forward to that. Yeah, that's it. See ya.